So around 2 decades ago, there's 3 friends, and they're looking to help one athlete that was paralyzed in a triathlon. They set up this fairly small fundraiser in hopes of helping this one athlete have a little bit of funds for a van with hand controls. This fundraiser was the beginning of something big known as the Challenge Athletes Foundation. The story of the Challenge Athletes Foundation is a wild ride. You will hear this story, and also the story of the charismatic co-founder, Bob Babbitt. Listen to how Bob Babbitt and his 2 friends put it all on the line and end up building an empire within the adaptive sports community. And also we learn more about Bob Babbitt's impact within the Ironman and triathlete communities. So tune in.
Through that tragedy taught me life is finite. You really have a short window to take what it is from life that you want and enjoy it.
You can go back to that day, February 18, 1990, and change what happened. My honest answer is I wouldn't change it.
You're just going to have to go through it, and your strength is going to be found in simply going through it and being authentic and real in the process.
I was talking with my palliative care doctor today, and she turned around to me and she looked at me and she was like, do you think that you'll eventually beat this? And I was sort of like, yeah, that's probably what I'm trying to do.
No, nothing will ever take away the pain of my daughter not being here. It's my reality.
Well, I know what my body's going to do to me. I've got a wheelchair in my future. But you know what I've been looking for?
What's that?
One with off-road wheels.
Just remembering me as I am, happy and energetic and full of life, no matter what.
You can expect life to kick you in the teeth, but you always get back up, no matter what, and you just keep going.
Living Adaptive with Scott Davidson, a podcast about learning to live adaptively.
Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back. I am sitting here with Bob Babbitt right now. Bob Babbitt is well known as a professional triathlete and Ironman competitor. He is the co-founder of Competitor Magazine, the Challenge Athletes Foundation, Babbitt Media Group, Babbittville Radio, and he hosts a weekly radio show for many years called Competitor Radio. He also hosts a bunch of other shows. You can hear many of Bob's interviews on Babbittville Radio, and you can find links in the show notes. What's up, Bob? How are you?
I'm great, Scott. How are you doing?
Good. Bob, I've been binging on Babbittville Radio episodes, which are excellent. And I've been binging on those for the last couple days preparing for this interview. And I've been a longtime listener and watcher because you're also videoing a bunch of stuff too. How long have you been doing this show? How long have you had this broadcast company?
Well, we started back in 1990. I started Competitor Magazine covering running and triathlon and cycling in 87. And I just felt like our sports were not just underserved, but just unknown. People really didn't know running, triathlon, cycling. It was sort of the formative years. And so I went to a local radio station here in San Diego and said, listen, I'd like to buy time on your station. And Sunday night would be great. It doesn't really matter to me what time or day it is. And my whole idea was I wanted people to be listening to a sports radio station and hearing interviews with Wayne Gretzky or Magic Johnson, and then all of a sudden hear an interview with a Rudy Garcia-Tolson, who was a double above the amputee, or a Dave Scott, 6-time Ironman champion, and feel like, hey, if those guys are on this station, they must be celebrities too. So that was sort of the whole idea. I was growing a brand called Competitor and trying to grow our sports at the same time. And over the years, doing the show every Sunday night from 8 to 10, which I still do today since 1990. We've been doing it forever and ever. It's actually, we're moving in on, 30 years or something like that. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, it was the late 90s. I'm riding my bike at a place called Fiesta Island. And it's a one-way road. And I'm riding around, and I'd see this woman running the other direction. And every time I went by her, she'd point at her head. She was wearing headphones, and I couldn't figure out what she was doing. And I stopped and said, what are you doing? She goes, I'm listening to your show. Now, remember, back then, the only way you could listen to my show was if you were by your radio at between 8 and 10 on a Sunday night and living in Southern California. And she goes, I tape your show on cassette, and then I play it on my cassette player and listen to it when I run. I'm like, wait a second, people could listen to this anytime they want? That's unbelievable. So that led to podcasting, and that led to Babbittville, and here we are.
Babbittville is a legend show for sure in my realm. And you're a legend in general. You're a Hall of Famer in the triathlon and Ironman world. but you're also a huge deal in the adaptive world, which is really important. You co-founded and you run the Challenge Athletes Foundation, likely the most notable nonprofit focusing on helping put challenge people into the athletic realm. In my opinion, likely the most notable. And this has been going on for 26 years of major success. And for those listening that don't know the history, can you briefly tell us how you got into this realm?
Well, really, everything came down to a gentleman by the name of Jim Mclaren. Jimmy was a 300-pound football player at Yale. And back in 1985, he was on his motorcycle going to acting classes in New York City when he was hit by a bus and thrown 90 feet in the air, dead on arrival at the hospital. He lost his lower left leg. And at the time, I had Competitor Magazine, and he reinvented himself as an endurance guy. And we're talking a walking leg. We're not talking a cheetah. We're talking a walking leg, sort of prehistoric by today's standards. He ran a 3:16 marathon and went 10:42 at the Ironman World Championship in Hawaii. And I was covering Jimmy as he was accomplishing all this. So we became good buds. And he really, if you think about it, back then, someone who was an amputee was getting all this media and all this sponsorship, which was so unique back then. Challenge athletes really weren't that noticeable, and they certainly weren't getting he was sponsored by Bud Light. He was getting mainstream sponsorship and traveling the world as a one-legged guy. Everybody knew who he was. Mm-hmm. Well, flash ahead 8 years, and he was racing in Orange County, California. He's on his bike, and a van goes through a closed intersection, hits the back of his bike, propels him headfirst into a pole. A guy's already an amputee becomes a quadriplegic. And at that point, it was really all about Jimmy for us. We weren't looking to start a foundation. It was myself, Jeffrey Esikow, who worked for a clothing company called Tinley at the time, and then Rick Kozlowski, who was a race director. So we had me, the marketing guy, we had Jeffrey, the financial guy, and we had Kaz, the event guy. And we're like, well, let's put on a little triathlon. Let's raise $25,000. And the reason we wanted to raise $25,000, I'd covered a lot of wheelchair athletes through Competitor Magazine, Jim Knob and David Bailey. And when I'd ask them the worst part about becoming paralyzed, invariably it was, I'm 30 years old. Here come mom and dad back in my life. No sense of self, no sense of independence. So our goal became, we're going to raise $25,000. We're going to buy Jimmy a van with hand controls to give him that independence that he's not going to have, not going to feel like he has. So we put on this event. We raised $49,000. We think our job is done. And 3 amputee women came up to us and they told us, it's great what you did for Jimmy. Jimmy's our hero. But did you know if you get injured, your health insurance covers a walking around leg or an everyday wheelchair? Anything to do with sport is considered a luxury item, which is laughable, and it's not covered by insurance. So at that point, we made the decision we were going to create the Challenged Athletes Foundation. And if someone needed a piece of equipment, training expenses, or travel expenses to stay in a game of life through sport, the Challenged Athletes Foundation will always be there. And 25 years later, we've sent out 23,000 grants, raised over $100 million. This last year, we gave out $4.3 million for 2,806 grants in 97 different sports. So it's one of those things that I feel like we've helped give people hope and independence and inspiration. And if you give people a piece of equipment and the next thing you know, they're riding around the block with their family or they're going to the Paralympic Games, then you're doing the right stuff.
Here's how important your organization is. I've encountered many folks in the adaptive realm, in the challenged athletes realm, if you will. And some of them have found their purpose. Their meaning in life is to help others fill out those forms and get that CAF grant, to get the athletic leg or whatever it is they need to participate in sports. And that is where they found purpose, just helping others get to your grant, which is a pretty incredible thing. And I was going to correct you. You are 100% correct. $100 million is a ridiculous amount of money that you've raised over 26 years. That's an insane amount of money. I've talked to a lot of organizations and I don't know many that come in that realm, Paralympics maybe, and Special Olympics, stuff like that. But really, it's a ridiculous amount of money. You mentioned that Jim Mclaren, your friend, and I know the story really well. I've encountered it many times before. And you mentioned his story. But you also, like you said, you were covering wheelchair athletes previously. How many?
Yeah,
like
before CAF.
Yeah. How long was this coverage? When did you start incorporating adaptive athletes into your life? Into your coverage?
Very, very early on. If you look at our early, it's ironic. I've been putting together our years of Competitor magazine starting in '87, and actually before Competitor had a magazine called Running and Triathlon News that I was editor of. I had Jim Knob, the 5-time winner of the Boston Marathon, on, and he. On the cover of the magazine, he's in a 4-wheeled chair, racing chair, right?
Yeah.
Before it was 3-wheeled. They're like a shopping cart. And what I found, and Jimmy was an Olympic trials pole vaulter before, again, he was on a motorcycle, which we call donor cycles. I mean, the motorcycle thing is, I wish they would go away. Jimmy was one of those guys that had this amazing personality, former Olympic trials pole vaulter. And he didn't understand why there was no money in wheelchair racing. He said, well, I'm first guy across the line. Why am I not getting money? He's wearing a Dalmatian one-piece speed suit. And he convinced David Bailey, who was a motocross champion, who became paralyzed, to get into road racing. And Craig Blanchette was a double above-knee amputee from birth, who he and Jim Knob had these great races. But what I loved about it, the stories were very rich. It was more, Jimmy was more about changing perceptions. Like he gave, at the end of every race that he won, he gave away his trophies. And I heard this so many times from guys who became close friends. This is long before CAF. A buddy of mine named Bruce Cornell, who was injured in a construction accident. And he says, first time I met Knob, we're sitting in rehab, and they're telling us that you need to get a van with a motorized ramp to get in and out of. You got to get rid of your pickup truck. These are the things you can't do.
Yeah.
And then he says, I look out the window and I see this guy in a Rambler convertible, and I see him reach into the back seat of the Rambler and yank this chair out, throw it next to his car, and basically jump out of the car into the chair. And then he rolls in and tells us, they've just told you what you can't do. I'm here to tell you what you can do. And I'll never forget that, because Bruce Cornell was not the only guy who told me that Jim Knob story. But Jimmy, it was all about, if we showcase our sport in front of the public, then people who have friends in chairs will go, wait a second, there's opportunity. These guys are racing, and I'm trying to figure out how to get over there to go to the bathroom. And these guys are traveling the world, and they're racing in chairs. So that became a big deal. And I created an event. There was a bike race in Southern California called the La Jolla Grand Prix bike race. They had a men's race and a women's race. And Richard Brine was the race director, who ended up creating Speed Play pedals. But I reached out to Richard, said, Richard, you know what I'd love to do? I want to create a wheelchair criterium on your course in between your men's race and women's race. And he goes, I'm in. Sounds great. So it's a half-mile loop. It was a 5K race. It was a crit. And what we did is we brought in a flatbed truck in and put it at one of the corners, right? And brought in patients from Sharp and Scripps and had them up on this flatbed truck. And I interviewed a quadriplegic up on the flatbed truck. And he says, I said, what's important about this? He goes, what's important is I might not get to where they're at, but it's important for me to know that it's there, that there is racing out there, that there is something beyond what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis. And to me, that was really, really important. It was less about the racing, but the funny part was the story in the paper the next day wasn't about the bike race. It was about Knob and Bailey. It was about the wheelchair race, because those stories resonate. Those stories, people can relate to people overcoming. And that, when we put Craig Blanchette on the cover of Competitor, my entire staff was like, this guy has no legs. You're putting a guy with no legs in a chair on the cover of our magazine, which depends upon people picking it up to read it for our advertisers to get benefit. And it was risky, but I didn't think it was a risk, because Craig Blanchette was the first Nike Just Do It athlete. He was somebody who had a great story, and besides that, was a phenomenal athlete, and more importantly, had a great rivalry. Rivalry in sport is essential. And when you have a Mark Allen and Dave Scott, Paul Newby Frazier, Aaron Baker in triathlon, or you have Jim Knob and Craig Blanchette, who don't like each other, right? They don't like each other. They're racing each other. There's a black hat. There's a white hat. Media understands that and can relate to it. So sorry to go on so long about that, but to me, that stuff was really, really important. And besides that, David Bailey was close to suicidal. Didn't know what he was going to do. The guy was making $750K a year before he was paralyzed. And then Kanab was the one who was like, what he told him? He said, David, why walk when you can fly? Yeah.
I love it.
Getting from the seat in your van to the chair is an athletic event. He goes, I was a pole vaulter, and I had 3 shots to get over the bar. Well, getting from my driver's seat in the car, I got 1 shot, and I better not screw it up. He looked at everything that way. And eventually Bailey, who was a big Ironman fan, came back to win the Ironman World Championship in the hand cycle and racing chair. And that race and the rivalry again between, here you've got a Navy SEAL, Carlos Moleda, who'd been shot in the back in Panama. Mm-hmm. Then you've got David Bailey, who made $750K as the best motocross guy in the world, both of them wanting the same prize at the Ironman World Championship. And 2 years in a row, Carlos kicked David's butt. And the third year, David finally won it. And it was that photo of David during the marathon with, fully extended in the racing chair is a huge mural in our CAF building. It's a huge part of our history. And really the rivalry between those two people who were racing that day were running by David or riding their bikes during the bike ride and during the run, and they knew what was going on. Carlos is here. David is there. You can beat him. Go get him. That became a David Scott, Mark Allen story. And what I felt is the rivalry and the battle transcended the disability. It transcended the wheelchair. It was 2 great athletes who wanted to kick the other guy's ass. Period. End of story.
I love that. Adaptive athletes in general. Well, athletes in general, it's all about, like you said, rivalry, crushing the person in front of you.
Absolutely.
But there's a little bit of a different hunger, I feel, at times when you're doubted. You're doubted more. But one thing I want to say.
No question.
Well, you talked about something that's impressive. You said 2 things in particular that really stick out. Well, a lot sticks out, but 2 things. You mentioned Aaron Baker and you mentioned possibilities. And I've interviewed Aaron before, talked with him, and his mom wrote a letter to a doctor that said, let's stop dealing in the probabilities and start dealing in the possibilities. And your foundation is pretty much, you in particular, are pretty much all about, let's go with the possibilities and see what we can do. And that brings this question. And I don't normally ask this question so much, but what was early life like? What made you so fundamentally positive and fundamentally looking for those possibilities?
It's fascinating. I started looking back at this when I was writing putting together a book of all my articles called Never a Bad Day. And one of the things that hit me as a kid, I just remember I was the organizing guy. I was the guy who would go to everybody's house. And back then, you didn't have email or that type of stuff. So when I went to your house and said, hey, Scott, we're going to be, playing baseball in the street in 15 minutes. He's like, okay, who else? The first question you ask is, who else is playing? Well, I don't have anybody else. You're the first guy I'm going to. Well, I got Mike coming. I got Danny coming. I got Steve coming. And okay, I'll come. So, I get all these guys coming. And if I had said, well, I got nobody, you're the first one, they were like, man, I'll watch TV. So I was always sort of that guy who was like looking for ways to get people involved with stuff. And I wanted to play baseball. I wanted to get everybody else involved. And, and my mom was involved with a charity called Infants Aid in Chicago. And I just saw how hard she worked and how much it meant to her. They were dealing with premature babies and things like that. And just how much she cared about it. And I knew she wasn't getting paid to do it. She just loved doing it. And that part of charity and giving back and also recognizing good stories when I got into, my first Ironman was in 1980. There was only 100 of us, 108 of us total. And the year before, there was only 15. And the year before that, it was only 15. And I just felt when I finished that Ironman, even though I was totally unprepared, had no idea what the hell I was doing, had a bike with flat-proof tires, and thing cost me $75 at a police auction, and whole back end was charred in a fire, and I had panniers, sleeping bag, and tent on the bike.
Jeez.
Because I thought because I'm an idiot. You swam 2.4, rode 56, camped out, and rode back the next day, and then ran the marathon. I had no idea you did all that stuff in one day. But when I did it in one day, it changed my perception of me. All of a sudden, I felt like, wait a second, I can accomplish more than I thought I could. That led to me, I was a teacher, I was a PE teacher at the time. I left teaching. I loved this. I felt the sport was cathartic. This sport changed me. I needed more of that. And the magazine, which was called Running News, probably through my insistence, it became Running and Triathlon News. And I invested heavily in this growing this sport. And with competitor, my whole goal was getting new people out to try this sport. As soon as a race is over, the corrals are empty for next year. What can we do to get more people into our world? So that's in a nutshell, it was growing the population that loves running, triathlon, and cycling, and at the same time, seeing people who weren't given that opportunity.
Yeah.
You know, we didn't have wheelchair athletes in the Ironman until 1994. And the reason was, if we allow someone to use a hand cycle rather than a bicycle, or a racing chair rather than running, we're changing the sport, and we're giving people an opportunity to say, well, I don't swim well, I want to use a windsurfer. You know, are we opening up Pandora's box if we allow these wheelchair athletes in? It's funny when you look back at the thinking back in the, you know, even not that long ago in the 90s.
Sure.
But a guy named John Franks was the first guy to attempt the Ironman. He missed the bike cutoff time. The following year, in 95, a guy named John McLean came over, and he missed the bike cutoff time. And then the discussion became, well, maybe hand cycle and wheelchair guys can't do this. I'm like, we should change the cutoff times. I'm like, no, level playing field. Guys will figure it out. It's similar to people figuring out how to go sub-4 for the mile. Eventually, someone's going to do it. In the third year, John McLean, he missed it in 95 and 96, 97. He made all the cutoff times. And the following year, Carlos Maleta, who I mentioned, the Navy SEAL who'd been shot in the back, he not only finished the race, he went 10:55, which would have won the race. Overall, he would have won the race in 78 and 79, going 10:55, and he did it in a hand cycle on a racing chair. And it's changing those perceptions that really is something that's always moved me. And when somebody says, you can't do that, that's the opening of a conversation. You know, you can't have wheelchair athletes do that. Yeah, we can. And not only that, they're going to become a great part of your history and a great part of your story. I just finished the 40th anniversary Ironman book, and the Carlos and David story is as big a story as the Dave Scott Mark Allen story.
Nothing drove me more than when I had a pair of shorts on. They looked at my legs. They saw my skinny legs, you know, muscle not there, and they doubted it. And then I beat them, you know, like there's something about that. But there's something about you. You said, figure it out. Like I figured it out growing up. I'm the product of the 80s and 90s, and we didn't have much connection, you know, during that time. And these athletes figured it out. But you're different in a way that you took the gloves off, the way Christian Bailey, who works with your organization, takes the gloves off and sits there in a chair and lets the kid fall, lets the kid crash and say, stop coddling them. Where did you, you know, how did you end up with that approach where it's like, don't baby these people, don't do this. Let's go. Let's take the gloves off.
Opportunity. You know, when you're giving people an opportunity in sport, it's an opportunity for success, but you know, the road to success leads to a few speed bumps in the way.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, watching when we first got wheelers in, and John Franks didn't make it that first time. And actually the funny part is John McLean, the second year he tried, he didn't make the bike cutoff, but just to see if someone could do the race, they said, John, go off and do the marathon, just so that we have an idea that someone can actually finish this. And you and I both know the racing chair is going to be faster than a runner. So it wasn't about finishing the race. Once they finished the bike ride, that was pretty much a given, but people didn't know that. So when he came across the line, they put a medal around his neck, and his brother was the first one to say, you got to take that off now. You didn't finish. You can't wear that medal. And he did. He took it off, but he came back the next year and he finished. So there's going to be pitfalls. There's going to be issues, but you know, the idea is opportunity. And sometimes it's an opportunity to fail. We have a film I should send you a copy of our film. It's called We Are Triathletes.
I would love it.
It's about 4 athletes. We've sold 19,000 tickets around the world. We've been in 6 countries with the film. It's been great. Rudy Garcia Tolson, double above knee amputee, is one of the 6 athletes we picked to try to do an event, an Iron distance race called Challenge Roth in Germany. Rudy didn't finish the race, but he got through the bike ride. And when you watch him and you're told his backstory, you really get a sense of how as somebody who's missing both legs and he doesn't have quads or hamstrings and he's trying to ride a bike, and you see that struggle. The film allows you to see that struggle. So that to me is one of the big things that I always wanted. I wanted our athletes, the challenge athletes, to be at mainstream events. It's one thing to go to the Paralympics and be competing against other challenge athletes. I think that's great. But a lot of times the microphone and the spotlight is on able-bodied events.
Sure.
And having an athlete like Rudy or a Jim Mclaren, they stand out. And then they're all of a sudden there's a bigger megaphone for people out there who might not know what's out there. So it's in a long-winded way that what I see is that our sports change lives every single day, and people need to know, at that point of trauma. CAF tends to come in at the point of trauma, and we're there sort of at their lowest point in life sometimes, and hopefully we're there to guide them to whatever they want to do. If it's going for a bike ride with the family, if it's playing beep baseball, which I'm learning a lot about right now, baseball for blind folks, visually impaired folks, it's an awesome sport, and we buy a lot of beep baseball. We provide a lot of beep baseball grants. So to me, it's that opportunity. Sport is opportunity, and when I read through the grants, and you read a woman who lost her vision at 7, and she was acting out and so angry and didn't have anything to live for in her mind, and found beep baseball. And now she's 29 and she's a mom and she's traveling the world playing beep baseball, and she's comfortable in her own skin. And I think people underestimate the power of sport and how the adrenaline from sport, the sweating from sport, the accomplishment from sport, all of that leads to a better life and makes you more successful as a parent, as an employee, as an employer. All of that is essential. And to me, it all starts so granularly with, hey, you need what? A hand cycle? Let's get you a hand cycle, and let's move from there.
Yeah, it's that one step, that that one tool that gets them there.
Exactly.
I think this is a pretty important thing to point out, is that Challenge Athletes Foundation, you've spanned 26 years formalized, in years and previous to those 26 years also you've been involved in a community. That's better research and experience than the National Institutes of Health. That's better than what you're going to get from any academic out there. When you sit down and say, I know these experiences, I've read countless stories, I've encountered countless stories, and I can tell you, an overall theme of this. Do you see an overall theme when it comes to the response after something bad happens, or maybe they're born with something?
From a point of trauma, think about it. And we hear this, and I see this in these grants all the time. If someone loses a leg in a motorcycle accident, they don't know anybody in the world of adaptive sports. They don't know anybody who's an amputee for the most part, right? And we forget a lot of times, a lot of our folks are not necessarily living in San Diego or Chicago or New York. They're living in Nebraska. They're living in Mississippi, in a little town where they are the only amputee or the only wheelchair-bound athlete or the only visually impaired athlete that they know of or that their parents know of. So even in this era of the web and people can find things, it always surprises me that people aren't aware that there are opportunities out there. And so that to me is a big issue, is letting people know that the opportunity is there. And when you see somebody like a Scout Bassett, who's a single above knee amputee, and you see her come from an orphanage in China. She had a leg burned off in a chemical fire before she's a year old and abandoned at an orphanage in China. First 7 years of her life, the kids were never allowed outdoors. They never were allowed outdoors. They were basically servants in this orphanage, cleaning and cooking and doing all that crap every day. And when she was adopted at the age of 7, she weighed 22 pounds. Came to the U.S. within a year and a half. She was winning spelling bees in English, a language she had just learned. Full ride academic scholarship to UCLA. Next thing you know, she's going back to Beijing to be a para-triathlete and gets a bronze medal as an age group para-triathlete. And now she's a Paralympian in track and field, American record holder in 100 and 200 meters, and world record holder at 400 meters for single above knee women. And she's an ambassador for Nike. She's an ambassador for CAF. It's an amazing talent. But look where she started, and look where she's come to. And she's, ironically, this last couple of years, we've had kids who've been adopted by families in the U.S. who came from the same exact orphanage that she was at. And the bonding that you see there. And those kids now see that there's hope. They go, wait a second, this is where I'm at. Look at where she's at. Why can't I get there? Why can't I pick that as a path to take? And that, to me, is what it's all about. And so many of our athletes are understanding that they have a role. It's the old give back rule, right? We gave to you. Your job is to give back to the next person and give that same passion that we provided to you guys.
Speaking of passion, this is a little bit off course, but a lot of people want to make their passion. They want to make their passion how they make a living, how they survive out there.
Right.
You did it.
Yep.
You did it. That's like, it's pretty rare, man. A lot of people are sitting in that cubicle. How'd you make that jump?
It's funny because when we started Competitor, we had the magazine Running and Triathlon News had just closed, and I didn't have ownership in it. It was just, it was closed down, and my partner Lois Schwartz was the photographer at Running and Triathlon News, and the two of us, I convinced her to leave teaching. She was the art teacher at the same school I taught at, and to come and be our photographer. And so now we're both out of work. And I went and met with, and Competitor was a free publication. And those two other free publications in California, one was California Bicyclist, one was Southwest Cycling. I went and met with both the publishers and said, listen, if we combined running, triathlon, and cycling into one magazine, I think that could be really successful. And both of them told me the same thing. They said, listen, we will never put a skinny runner on the cover of our magazine. We would never put a challenge athlete on the cover of our magazine. And triathlon's a fad. It'll be gone in 5 years. And I was like, oh, crap. I'm hosed. So I came back to San Diego, and some friends got together, invited Lois and I to this meeting, and gave us a check for $17,000 and said, go start your own magazine. Well, our first print bill was $20,000. So we didn't start out in a great financial situation. We were underneath 20,000 pounds of bike racks in a guy's garage, and we were paying $200 a month for 200 square feet. And I was living on friends' floors. I had no place to live, but we loved it. We were driving to LA every weekend and covering running and triathlon events. And over time, and we didn't know that 95% of all new magazines go out of business in the first year. Fortunately, ignorance is bliss. And we grew Competitor because we loved it. It was our passion. And I loved the athletes we were covering. I loved the storytelling. And over time, Competitor became 11 editions and 500,000 circulation, and became the Competitor Group with 34 rock and roll marathons under our Competitor Group umbrella, and a series I had started called Muddy Buddy, which was a predecessor of Spartan Race and Tough Mudder. It started in 1999, and we were doing 27 to 30,000 people a year crawling through mud pits. And $500 from every one of those events went to CAF. At the same time, Land Rover came on board as a sponsor, and they donated an additional $1,000 per event to CAF. So I've always tried to integrate, here's the magazine, here's CAF. Mm-hmm. How do I connect the dots? Here's a radio show, so I can have Rudy Garcia Tolson on the radio show. I can transcribe that interview for Competitor Magazine. I can have Rudy on the cover of the magazine, and I can have Rudy come out and participate in the Muddy Buddy event. And then people get to see the struggle. When people are running by him, they get to see what Rudy's dealing with. It's one thing to read the article, but now it's up close and personal, and they get it. They can see how important sport is to that young man. and why it's important for him to have the funds he needs to get to the events or to get the equipment he needs.
I gotta also kind of sidetrack a little bit. I love, you talked about, the shows you put on, and, you're also doing a lot of telephoning, stuff like that, where you're getting funding. But one of my favorite things is Breakfast with Bob, and you guys are like getting ready to kick it off and a ukulele starts playing. I love that.
Yep.
I love that. It sets a tone, man. You have a special way of talking with people, bringing out the story. You've been a storyteller for probably your whole life. You know what I mean? You get the story out, you share it. And that, that gets into, if anyone deserves to like put a book out there of experiences and stories and just continue writing those books. I know you've been involved in and stuff like that, but, actually get out and just continue writing one. It would be you. At least in my world, it would be a highly interesting subject matter. Now, you straddle the world of adaptive and non-adaptive athletes, as everybody's hearing in this interview, and you live this world of high competition. I've watched your induction into the Hall of Fame for Ironman. And do you find commonalities in a human experience between the challenged athlete and also the non-adaptive or able athlete? Do you find there's a commonality in mindset?
Absolutely. It's the same. It's exactly the same. The deal is, when I created the Endurance Awards, where we cover running, we do this awards banquet for 20 some years at SeaWorld in San Diego. And we always had a challenge athlete of the year there. And I had a celebrity athlete of the year and runner of the year and triathlete and cyclist of the year. And one of the things I'd say every year, the one common denominator is everybody in this room suffers, right? If you're the best amputee 5K guy in the world, you can relate to what Steve Scott, the miler, is feeling when he's running 136 sub 4 minute miles. You can relate to Dave Scott and Mark Allen doing the Ironman and racing side by side 8 hours into a race, and they're still side by side. That's universal. If you're an athlete, you're an endurance athlete. I don't care if you're, if you are in a wheelchair, if you're an amputee. It's like Carlos Moleda said, when I'm in the bay in Kona before the swim starts and I'm treading water with 3,000 other people, we're exactly the same. Everybody in that water, in that bay, is exactly the same. Our goal is to get through that swim, get through the bike ride, and get to that magical finish line on Elite Drive. He goes, I never feel more alike everyone else, except when I'm racing. When I'm racing, I'm the same. Our goals are the same. Our equipment might be a little different, but the suffering is definitely the same.
The commonality of the suffering is really interesting. You mentioned rich stories. A lot of these, when you're early on, you're following these wheelchair athletes that are doing marathons, and they have these rich stories where they came from, their experiences, and so forth. The human experience magnified seems to really hit home for those that are struggling, fighting cancer, adapting to something, whatever it may be. Is that human condition magnified, and those rich stories are something to really learn a lot from, because in the end, like you said, many people struggle. I mean, everybody's going to struggle and everybody's going to adapt to something, and that's it. It really is.
Well, you know how it also connects the dots. So 2009, Rudy Garcia Tolson didn't make the bike cutoff time in Kona at the Ironman. And he called me up a couple days later and says, I got to get back on a horse. Can I do Ironman Arizona, which was 6 weeks later? Got him in Ironman Arizona. And then he's, we're that morning, and you think Ironman Arizona and Ironman Florida are the first two Ironman events to sell out. And one of the reasons is if you can use the ultimate oxymoron, easy Ironman, 140.6 miles, there's no such animal. But those races are pretty flat, unless it's really windy. Those are a great race for first-timers. So imagine 2,600 first-timers who are scared to death. It's pitch black out. They're going to be jumping into this 60-degree Tempe lake. It's, that time of the morning in November, it's probably 45 degrees. It's cold. These people are all doubting, what the hell have I signed up for? Rudy takes off his prosthetics, puts on his little stubbies, and you see Rudy from the back of the group walking down towards Tempe Town Lake. And the rumbling started. It was like, it's Rudy. It's Rudy. And all of a sudden, everybody just spontaneously started cheering. And the reality was, what every one of those people was thinking is, I don't know if I can do this. This is going to be really hard. It's really cold. This is 140.6 miles. What the hell was I thinking? Wait a second. This kid's doing it? He's got no legs. What the hell am I worried about? He gave them hope.
Yeah.
That moment gave them hope, and they gave him support. So it's one of those things where everybody gains from having our challenged athletes participate in any of these events. Because when people are doubting themselves and they see a guy in a wheelchair, or they see a guy with a pacer because he's visually impaired, they immediately look inward and go, what the hell? Dude, suck it up. You can do anything. This guy, this gal is proving it over and over again to me and everybody here that there are no limitations when it comes to the human spirit.
Now, you like to make people cry. I mean, you do. I'm sorry, but you do. Those stories, when you start to watch those videos that you have out, man, people will cry. It's because they're very touching experiences. You're the original, The Moth. You're the original, like, podcast where you're out there telling these stories, telling these real stories. You're the original gangster of that, if you will.
Thank you.
You really are. Now, I mean, I just was recently, this morning I was watching an interview, and you're surprising a young man who lost his leg below the knee because of a football accident, and Drew Brees is going to present him. You're like, number 9's coming to present
Alex Ruiz.
Yeah.
One of my favorite people. Yeah.
Now that immediately after binging on your stuff, listening, watching, so many years of experience, what interviews in all these years? And you're not doubting the other interviews. You're not putting them down, but like, what just pops in your head right now is one of your favorite interviews?
Wow. I mean, it's been 5,000. We figured out the other day.
That's it.
Over 5,000 interviews between.
Wow.
Yeah. That's a lot of interviews. But the ones that move me are, the ones where people changed. They changed themselves. And this isn't a challenged athlete, but the one that really resonates is one I did about a year and a half ago with a guy named John Mcavoy, who you've probably never heard of. But John grew up in a crime family. Imagine growing up in The Sopranos, okay?
Yeah.
So he grew up, he's in England, and John's family, his dad and uncle were arrested for Brink's truck robbery back in the 80s and were doing time. John got his first gun when he was 16.
Jeez.
He went and did his first armed robbery when he was 18. He was not a very good robber. He got caught and he was doing 5 to 10 for his first offense because of a family history. And then as soon as he got out, he does it again. And this time he gets a double life sentence because he's a repeat criminal. He comes from a criminal family. So he's in this like double secret wing of the prison with the bombers, with all the bad guys. There are like 7 guys in this wing. And while he's there, and he's still bitter and angry and just, he's a criminal. And the guard tells him, hey, we got a piece of equipment, a rowing machine that you're allowed to use for 20 minutes a day. So he goes and gets on the rowing machine and he goes, Bob, I felt like I was in the Mediterranean. I was just out there. I had escaped from the prison, and I'm rowing out in the Mediterranean. And the guard, and this is what I love, again, the human spirit, the guard recognizes that this guy looks pretty good on this machine.
Yeah.
And he reaches out to the UK Indoor Rowing Association and says, what are the records? And can I administer? This guy isn't going to any of your competitions anytime soon.
Yeah.
Can I administer to this young man? And they're like, yeah, he breaks 7 UK records, 1 world record. And the next thing you know, the guard is pushing for him to go to a minimum security prison. They allow him out of the prison to go run a 50K trail race. And the next thing you know, he's out of prison and doing the Ironman. And his book is called From Iron Bars to Iron Man. And you're just listening to this and you're going, one, the guard is as big a part of the story as John trying to turn his life around. This guard, think about how many criminals this guy has dealt with who never even thought about turning their life around or were just bullshitting. Well, here's this guy who's turning his life around, and the guard is recognizing it and pushing for him to get better treatment. And the next thing you know, he and the guard actually travel throughout Europe to talk about don't give up on people. And I think there's a connection between our athletes, right? When you look at our athletes and not giving up on people. Another one of my favorite interviews, Jamie Whitmore, was a 37-time Xterra champion. Xterra is swim, mountain bike, run. Mm-hmm. And growing up, she wanted to be an Olympic swimmer, and she just wasn't good enough. And in high school, she ran high school track and cross country. She ran in college, but wasn't going to make the Olympics in that. And she always, as a little girl, she remembers watching the Olympics and seeing, the person on the top of the podium with the flag and the anthem. And that was her goal, is to get some of that. And it wasn't going to happen in swimming. It wasn't going to happen in running. She got a mountain bike, and she was good on the mountain bike, but she wasn't going to be good enough to be a mountain biker. And then she finds the sport of Xterra, off-road triathlon, and she's great at it, but it's not an Olympic sport. She wins 37 titles and a world championship. Well, a number of years ago, she had a pain in the back of her hamstring, and the doctors, believe it or not, because you understand this as well as I do, mm-hmm. They were like, you must have a low threshold of pain. This is a person who's racing up at 10,000 feet on a mountain bike. Yeah, no, that's not the reality. Turned out there was a tumor wrapped around her sciatic nerve. And when they cut that, she knew she would never be able to run again. She'd have drop foot. So I called her husband, Courtney, while they were in the hospital, while she was being operated on. I said, Courtney, I know Jamie. She's one of the most competitive people I have ever met in my life. And this woman needs sport. I mean, sport, again, people underestimate the power of sport and the need for sport. So I have her call me when she's done, when she's out of the hospital. She calls me, and paracycling. So flash forward, 2016 Paralympic Games in Rio. I'm there when Jamie Whitmore goes to the top of the podium after winning the gold medal in the road race, and hearing her anthem and watching her flag go up. And all those years as a little girl in high school and college wanting to be Olympian, well, now she's a Paralympian. She's standing on the top step of the podium, hearing her anthem, and watching her flag go up. And you know what? You don't want trauma to come into your life. Nobody does.
No.
But if it does, to know a story like Jamie's, that she became a Paralympian and a world champion and a gold medalist and a motivational speaker after the worst moment of her life, those are the stories that resonate for me.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I find that you in particular, you share those stories and they go further. You talked about the Paralympics. You've got enough time now. Enough time has lapsed that you've provided, say, the tools for somebody to get out running and competing again, that you do have those stories down in Rio where you have a runner that got his first athletic leg from you and now he's competing and winning. In fact, I wonder if other countries are like, how do we sabotage Challenge Athletes Foundation so they don't build any more athletes, right?
Well, we provide a lot of grants internationally.
I know you do.
And then the funny part, you mentioned that Desmond Jackson, when we were in Rio, Desmond's mom came up to me in the lobby of the hotel. She goes, Bob, you probably don't remember, but 8 years ago when Desmond was 8 years old, CAF gave him a running leg. He's now 16, and tomorrow night he's running in the finals of the 200 meters here in Rio. I mean, that is, imagine if he didn't get that leg at the age of 8. And that's what happens a lot of times, is a lot of doctors will say, you know what, legs are expensive. You don't really want to get your child a running leg at the age of 6, 7, 8 years old because they're going to outgrow it. Wait till they stop growing. Wait till they're 14. So think about that. You've spent your formative years as the last kid picked in sports, always the slowest runner because you're running around on a walking leg, or you're given a high-end $15,000 running leg through OSER, the mm-hmm. greatest prosthetic company on the planet, and CAF. And now you can do whatever the heck you want. You don't have to go to Paralympics. You can go and play Little League baseball. You can go and you can play whatever sport you want. You can just be a kid. That's really what it came down to when Rudy Garcia Tolson's prosthetist Michael Davidson started working with him, it wasn't about Rudy becoming an Olympic runner. It was about little Rudy being able to be a kid and having the right legs for him to do whatever the hell he wanted to do.
Yeah, it's about that confidence to feel you can be part of it. Yeah, it's about that possibilities we talked about. Now, you work with a lot. You don't just work with individuals. You work with nonprofits. And you've been – Challenge Athletes Foundation has been really giving and I don't know, I guess mentoring towards other organizations that are in this realm. When did you become – I don't know if I would say comfortable, but yeah, I guess comfortable and willing to now stretch out and now help those organizations?
Well, I think what's really important, if we come into Cincinnati, Ohio, and promote that we're doing a run clinic or a swim clinic, and all these kids and families come out and they have this amazing day. Oh my God! You've got these professional running instructors, Peter Harsh and Bob Gailey, and they're working with you. Or we're doing a wheelchair basketball clinic or a sit volleyball clinic, whatever it happens to be. And then the circus leaves town. Right? We come in and do something and leave. That's, there needs to be a leave behind. We need to be working with the adaptive groups in those markets to show them best practices or to share best practices and to have someone, okay, I've just played. That was great that you guys did a sled hockey clinic, but where do I play? When do I play? How do I play? How do I keep my kid involved? That stuff's really important. That you can't just come in and provide a clinic. You've got to provide continuity. You've got to provide a link to somebody who can help and not just help the kid, but help the family. People who are there to support the family in everything they need. So that's a huge part of our mission, is not just coming into a market, but really hopefully working with the local groups to make sure that these kids and athletes have continuity.
How did you go from being a few $1,000s to, trying to get that van outfitted to $100 million? Was it just a ton of charisma? What did it take, man? It must have been just tireless.
Well, it's an amazing staff. The staff over at CAF, I think we got like 25, 26 folks.
Yeah.
They live and breathe the mission.
Okay.
Right now, we're in the midst of reading 3,000 plus grants requests.
Wow.
And every one of these stories, you have this manila folder with somebody's story inside and somebody's life inside, and every one of them is amazing. And when you read those, it doesn't take you long to understand how important your mission is, how important sport is. Just to share one, I was reading about a 39-year-old mother of 4 who was about to start law school, and she was at a Thanksgiving Day party, and a 2-year-old fell in the pool. She jumped in the pool, didn't know that she had a hole in her heart, but when she jumped in the pool, she had a massive stroke, and and she's paralyzed. She can't read, she can't write, and she can't speak. A woman who's about to go to law school. But you know what she wants? She wants a trike. She wants a recumbent trike to ride on. You see the picture of her on a recumbent trike with this huge smile on her face.
That's awesome.
That's what she wants. That's her happy area. That's her Camelot. Well, you got to make that happen, right? And so our team just is unbelievable. My co-founders, Jeffrey Essikow and Rick Kozlowski, are amazing, and Virginia Tinley has been our executive director from the very beginning. Our team is just spectacular across the board. And we have a lot of people who work at CAF. They could be making a hell of a lot more money other places, but it's the mission that they're there for. And that's something that you can, this is an amazing team. And just like with all the challenge athletes out there, it's understanding that it's all about team. It's all about working together. It's all about, hey, if we open a door here with Ironman and get hand cycle and wheelchair racing or racing chairs accepted, come on, we need athletes to be pursuing that and going after it and seeing if they can take the record and go even faster than people have gone before. And that leads to people trying their first ever triathlon in a hand cycle and racing chair, or just hand cycling around the block. But, all of that works together. And that just comes from, a team that is unbelievable.
Have you found that the athletes have, like you said, they're breaking world records, meaning they're improving? Have you found big jumps in the last 10 years? Because, equipment's getting better, or in the mindset?
Absolutely.
Also?
Well, mindset is, and there's more awareness on training. And it's funny for hand cycling, right? We just did an adaptive hand cycling camp in San Diego for women, and Carlos Maleta and his coach is this guy Rolf out of Germany. And what I didn't realize is there was really not much equipment for measuring wattage or doing lactate testing, things like that for hand cyclists. So it was like nothing.
Yeah.
Carlos was telling me when guys went to the Olympic Training Center, they basically said who's fastest, and then they get put on the team and give them a training program. But nobody's looking at what their potential is. Nobody's assessing their power, because I guess the training equipment is different, is upside down compared to what a bicycle would use. Mm-hmm. So Carlos and Rolf created this, and they had it in San Diego, and people were freaked out. They're finding they can push 250 watts for 20 seconds. They can push 300 watts or 500 watts. It's like, oh my God, this is so cool. So the equipment has changed a ton. I think Carlos, when he first did Ironman, his hand cycle was 34 pounds. Now it's like, 22 or something. So the equipment has changed a ton, and the awareness has changed a ton with online. People are sharing just like with, Jan Frodeno putting his training, or Lionel Sanders putting their training up. Our, challenge athletes are putting their training up as well. And the best practices, a lot of the amputee folks are understanding, listen, we've got to run less and do more high intensity stuff, but also we can run on an AlterG treadmill, or we can substitute cycling, indoor cycling, for some running. And we're still working the engine. So just the refinement and training has changed a ton. The awareness that there's different needs. As you know, someone who's quadriplegic might not sweat at all.
Sure.
So there's different issues, or lower heart rate. That type of stuff has to be dealt with. And I think there's more science going into it because there's more awareness of what the athletes need.
Now, this brings this question. This is a good question, I think, for Challenge Athletes Foundation. And this is, you've been so ambitious, many years of ambition. And the mission keeps getting more expansive and bigger. Where do you think you're at in 10 years? Where do you think you're at in 20 years?
That's what we've always done, is we've sort of grown organically, right? We've when things change, like a gentleman by the name of Scott Stackman created an event for us in New York, our New York Gala, that has raised, I think, north of $19 million in 12 years for CAF. When you get a champion like that who says, I want New York to be more connected to CAF, well, we're opening an office there. We've never had an office anywhere else. We'll have an office in New York sometime in 2019. San Francisco, we've got more folks up there. We actually have a staff person in San Francisco now. Mm-hmm. So we grow organically when there's a need, and when there's support, then we're going to make that happen. At the same time, nationally and internationally, it's more people are finding about who we are and what we do every day. And we've been giving out more grants. Like I said, last year was, it was $4.3 million worth of grants to 2,806 athletes. And this year, I'm sure will be a little bigger than that. But we don't, I've learned this from the corporate space. With competitors, sometimes you can put audacious goals out there of grow. For us, it's all about, let's make sure that we never forget the athlete. We're athletes first. We're mission first. Period. End of story. We want to help all the athletes we can, but we want to make sure that we're doing it the right way. And you don't want to ever expand to the point where you're not meeting your promises and you're not doing what you say you're going to do. So it's growing it's happening organically, but we're not pushing, saying, hey, we need to raise X amount, or we need to do this or do that. No, let's just help athletes achieve their dreams, and the rest will take care of itself.
Gotcha. Yeah, I can speak to your mission internationally, just knowing that I spoke to somebody recently, and he's going to devote a portion of his show to, helping people figure out these grants, helping them figure out the best way to fill them out, like I said earlier in the interview. But the point is you're growing internationally. You've already been there. You're one of the biggest in the group. Now, When we look at you, when we look at this organization, you have a new crop coming up each year. You've got a new batch. As generations move forward, you see new athletes. Can you share with us like one athlete maybe that sticks out in particular of the new crop that you're seeing?
Well, actually, what I love is Alex Ruiz. And the Alex story really was, here's a high school football player in Temecula at Linfield High. And in 2017, October 7th in 2017, he's rolling out to throw a pass and he gets tackled just like he had been tackled hundreds of times before. And somehow he goes down weird, ends up losing his leg below the knee. He compromised the popliteal artery in the back of the knee and went without blood flow for 8 hours, and they had to amputate. And here's this young man who's, he didn't know, I don't think he ever met an amputee before or anything like that. Well, the cool part of the story was his prosthetist, a guy named Peter Harsh, who's a close part of CAF, puts on our running clinics with Bob Gailey, amazing guy. It turns out that Peter was his prosthetist. So I called Peter and I said, hey, Peter, Drew Brees from the New Orleans Saints has a flag football league, football in America, and they actually have designated CAF as official charity. And I think it'd be really cool if we could get Drew to present Alex with his leg. And he said, well, let me call Alex's mom. He calls Alex's mom. Alex's mom starts crying because Alex's hero was Drew Brees. He wore number 9 because of Drew Brees. And he had his quotes on his wall from Drew Brees. He has a signed football from Drew Brees. So it was last May 11th, and I called Kurt Sandoval from KBC up in LA, and I said, Kurt, I think this is going to be an amazing story. And Kurt came down to shoot it. And so we got all the kids together at the flag football field and told them Alex's backstory. At that point, Alex didn't have a leg. He was in a wheelchair. So I had Alex rolls out after I tell his story and say, Alex, talk a little bit about why you're such a fan of Drew Brees. And he goes, well, Drew's this amazing quarterback, but he just seems like an amazing person as well. And he's a quarterback like me, and he's was considered undersized, and I've been considered undersized. And I said, well, there's somebody here who has something special for you. And Drew Brees comes walking out. And Alex is just like, oh my God, it's Drew Brees. And then Alex goes, hey, Bob, do you think Drew would run some pass patterns for me? I'm like, Drew, what do you do? Yeah, happy to. So Alex gets out of the chair on his crutches, and Drew Brees, Super Bowl winning quarterback, is running pass patterns for this young man who's missing a leg. And next thing you know, that piece gets picked up by Kurt Sandoval's piece gets picked up by Channel 1 in New York, which gets picked up by ESPN. Alex is on SportsCenter, and they're interviewing him on SportsCenter and Alex is like getting calls while he's a high school student. He's getting calls, and he's like, I have to take this, teacher, because it's CNN calling right now. It's USA Today. So ESPN right now is working on a feature on Drew and Alex and on Zach Miller, who from the Bears, who had a very similar injury to Alex but didn't lose his leg. And that'll be on one of the NFL shows coming up, hopefully in the next few weeks. But Alex, while this is going on, I get a call from Joaquim Cruz, who runs the para track and field program, going, hey, I'm watching this kid throw. I think he could throw the javelin. And I'm like, oh, well, let's have him come down and try that. So who knows? This kid could go to the Paralympics and throw the frickin' javelin. Now he just got his running leg, and he's planning to play baseball on his baseball team. Oh, and basically a little over a year after he lost his leg, he got back on the football field, and his first pass was a touchdown pass.
Wow. I didn't know the end of that. No, you can't.
Yeah, he's right. So yeah, his first pass was a touchdown pass. He threw another touchdown pass in the game. Zach Miller flew in from Chicago to be there for that. He flew in, got at 7:00 that night, got out to the field in Temecula, and then flew out at midnight. He flew in just to watch him do that. And so here's this kid who lost his leg, who now has a personal relationship with Drew Brees and Alex and Zach Miller. And his life is laid out in front of him. He can accomplish anything he wants to do.
I think that story is amazing. And I think that encompasses you, that encompasses Challenge Athletes Foundation, Bob Babbitt. And I think it shows that you make things happen. You have a big heart and you're always working tirelessly to make things happen. And I think that says a lot, and I hope that those are listening get attention towards you that may not know much about Challenge Athletes Foundation and may not know much about you or your story. I feel like it's an honor to sit here and talk with you. And I hope we can point people. We'll have links to Babbittville Radio. We'll have links to Challenge Athletes Foundation and social media links. We'll put it all in the show notes. We're going to put it on the site, and we'll try to get as much exposure as possible. Not that you don't do that already, not that you're not already out there. We really appreciate you coming on.
Scott, I appreciate everything you're doing to put a spotlight on adaptive sport. It's essential. And a lot of times I'll have people say, sports, is it really that important? And they look at it as sort of like, so the insurance company, like a luxury item. I'm like, you know what? It changes lives every single day. Sport is so essential for people to feel good about themselves. And I appreciate everything you're doing to draw attention to that.
Thank you. All right, that's the episode. Remember, you can find contact information for guests in the show notes or on our website, livingadaptive.com. On livingadaptive.com, you can also find previous episodes, writings, and a bunch of other good stuff. So go there. Peace.